principle number 5 for succeeding in law school is to remember that the number one thing you want to focus on is what your professor says in class. So what your professor says is the most important. Why? Because your professor writes your final exam and your professor grades your final exam. They're going to test on what they've talked about, because what they've talked about is what they think is important to know. So this means that if your professor spends 2 hours on a case, then you want to at least know the name of that case and what it stands for. Versus if your professor spends 10 minutes covering 30 cases, those cases probably aren't that important to your professor, and maybe it's okay to focus on them a little bit less. Another reason this is important to keep in mind is because a lot of students will get overwhelmed consulting tons of supplements, commercial outlines, student outlines from other professors, and they'll become overwhelmed with all of this. They don't know what to focus on. Well, we recommend supplements because they can really help clarify the law, and they can be really help you be really efficient in a lot of circumstances, but you don't want to become overwhelmed. Even if you literally just took great class notes and then focused on those class notes, turned those class notes into an outline, and never looked at one outside resource, you could easily get an A+ in your law school class. So any supplement, any commercial outline, commercial brief is just there to aid you and kind of speed up the process of understanding the law or maybe memorizing it. But you don't have to memorize additional law outside of what's actually in your class notes and outside of what your professor talks about. Because what your professor talks about is what they're going to test on. So that's the 5th principle to keep in mind in how to succeed in law school.